Episode 4, A Fractured Past. Previously on Roots and Reminiscence. Evelyn Parker discovered her late husband, John, had abandoned a wife and infant daughter 50 years ago before changing his identity. The family welcomed Catherine, John's first daughter, and learned through Eleanor's letter that John had been sent away out of love, not abandoned his family. After Catherine's son James married, Anna courageously left for Columbia University, while Catherine decided to move closer to her newfound family. Now, 3 months later, new revelations threatened to unravel everything they thought they understood about John's past. Chapter 1: The Phone Call. The first snow of December was falling softly outside Evelyn's kitchen window when the phone rang at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning. She had been enjoying her coffee and planning her day Christmas shopping for Anna's first visit home from Columbia, preparations for Catherine's house hunting trip the following weekend. The call shattered the peaceful morning like glass hitting concrete. "Mrs. Parker? This is Detective Ray Morrison with the Norfolk Police Department." Evelyn's blood chilled. Morrison. The same last name John had been born with. "Yes? Ma'am, I'm calling about some old case files we've been digitizing. Your husband's name came up in connection with a missing persons investigation from 1954. We'd like to speak with you about it." "Missing persons?" Evelyn's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I don't understand." "Mrs. Parker, according to our records, your husband John David Parker was originally named John Daniel Morrison. Is that correct?" "Yes, but, ma'am, John Daniel Morrison was reported missing by his wife Eleanor in March of 1954. She filed a police report claiming he had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. That report was never closed." Evelyn sank into her kitchen chair, her mind reeling. Eleanor had reported John missing? But Eleanor's letter had clearly stated that she had sent him away, that his departure had been mutual and planned. "Detective Morrison, I think there's been some confusion." Eleanor. "Mrs. Morrison, she sent my husband away. She told him to leave. We have a letter explaining everything." "Ma'am, I'd like to see that letter. Would it be possible for me to drive up there this afternoon? This case has been bothering me for months. You see, Eleanor Morrison was my grandmother." The phone slipped from Evelyn's hand, clattering against the kitchen table. Detective Morrison was Eleanor's grandson. Catherine's nephew? The family connections were becoming impossibly tangled. "Mrs. Parker? Are you there?" "I'm here," she managed. "Yes, please come. I think we all need to understand what really happened." After hanging up, Evelyn immediately called Michael, then Catherine, then on impulse Anna at Columbia. Within an hour, they had arranged an emergency family meeting for that afternoon. Whatever Detective Morrison had to tell them, they would face it together. 300 miles north, Anna Parker sat in the Columbia University Library, surrounded by textbooks on child psychology and development theory. Her first semester was nearly over, and she had surprised herself by not just surviving, but thriving in the competitive academic environment. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. "Family emergency. Can you video call at 2 p.m.? Detective wants to discuss Grandpa's past." Anna's stomach dropped. Just when their family had found peace with John's complicated history, something new was emerging. She quickly texted back, "Of course. Is everyone okay?" "Physically, yes. Emotionally uncertain. Love you." Anna stared at her phone, torn between worry and frustration. She had worked so hard to build a life in New York, to prove that she could pursue her dreams while staying connected to her family. But every time she felt settled, another family crisis pulled her attention back home. Her study partner, Jessica, noticed her distraction. "Everything okay?" "Family stuff. It's complicated. Want to talk about it?" Anna hesitated. She had shared some of her family's story with Jessica the basic facts about discovering her aunt Catherine and cousin James, but she'd left out the more dramatic details. How do you explain to a New York City native that your grandfather had basically faked his own death and created a new identity? My grandfather had secrets, Anna said finally. We thought we'd figured them all out, but apparently there are more. Secrets can be good or bad, Jessica observed. Which kind do you think these are? I don't know. But knowing my family, they're probably the kind that makes everything more complicated, while somehow bringing us closer together. Jessica laughed. That's oddly specific. You'd have to meet my family to understand. As Anna tried to refocus on her studying, she found her mind wandering to the last time she'd seen everyone together at James's wedding 3 months ago. They had felt so unified, so complete. Catherine had been radiant with joy, Michael had seemed at peace with his father's past. And even Evelyn had appeared ready to embrace whatever came next. What could a police detective from Norfolk possibly tell them that would threaten that hard-won harmony? Catherine stood in her empty Richmond house, surrounded by boxes and the echoes of 30 years of life. The moving truck would arrive tomorrow to transport her belongings to the apartment she'd rented just 40 minutes from Evelyn's house. After 3 months of house hunting, she had finally found the perfect place. It's a small cottage with a large garden and enough space for the family gatherings she was planning to host. The call from Evelyn had shattered her excitement about the move. A police detective who was Eleanor's grandson? It didn't make sense. Eleanor had been very clear in her letter that John's departure had been her idea. A mutual decision to end an unhappy marriage for everyone's benefit. Catherine's phone rang. James's name on the caller ID. Mom, I just got Evelyn's message. What's this about a police investigation? I don't know any more than you do, Catherine admitted. But James, I'm worried. We've built something beautiful with this family. What if whatever this detective has to tell us destroys it? Mom, remember what we learned from Dad's story. Truth doesn't destroy love. Secrets do. Whatever this is, we'll handle it together. Catherine smiled despite her anxiety. Her son had grown so wise since discovering his extended family. So confident in the bonds they'd built. When did you become the parent in this relationship? When I realized that families are stronger than the sum of their individual fears. Sarah and I will drive up for the meeting if you want us there. No, you have work, and Sarah has her nursing schedule. But James? I love you for offering. I love you too, Mom. And whatever this detective tells you, remember that it doesn't change who Dad became or the family he created with Evelyn. It doesn't change the 50 years of love and redemption that followed. Whatever happened in Norfolk. After the call, Catherine continued packing. But her mind kept returning to the months immediately after John's departure. She had been too young to remember details. But her mother had shared some stories over the years. Eleanor had been devastated when John left, not just sad, but genuinely frightened. She had convinced herself that something terrible had happened to him. Could Eleanor have filed a missing persons report before writing the letter they'd found? Could there be 2 different versions of the truth, separated by time and changing understanding? Catherine reached for a box of her mother's papers. Mother's documents she'd inherited but never thoroughly examined. If Eleanor had been in contact with the police about John's disappearance, there might be records, correspondence, something that would help explain the discrepancy. 2 hours later, she found a carbon copy of a letter Eleanor had written to the Norfolk Police Department in April 1954, just weeks after John's departure. To whom it may concern. I am writing to report my husband, John Daniel Morrison, as a missing person. He left our home on March 15, 1954, after taking money from our joint bank account and several personal items. I initially believed he had left voluntarily. But I now suspect foul play may have been involved. My husband had been acting strangely in the weeks before his disappearance. Nervous, secretive, looking over his shoulder as if he feared someone. He mentioned several times that he owed money to people who might hurt him if he couldn't pay. I'm particularly concerned because he took our 6-month-old daughter's birth certificate and social security card, along with his own identification papers. Why would a man planning to abandon his family need his baby's documents? Please investigate my husband's disappearance. I fear he may have been killed or kidnapped by people he owed money to. Our daughter deserves to know what happened to her father. Sincerely, Mrs. Eleanor Morrison. Catherine read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. This version of events was completely different from the story Eleanor had told in her deathbed letter. In 1954, Eleanor had believed John was in danger, possibly dead. She had suspected criminal involvement, not voluntary departure. So which version was true? Had Eleanor lied in her final letter to spare Catherine's feelings? Or had she learned something in the intervening years that changed her understanding of John's departure? Catherine reached for her phone to call Evelyn, then stopped. This information was too significant to share over the phone. She would wait until the detective arrived. Until the whole family could process these revelations together. But as she continued packing, Catherine felt a growing unease. What if the father she'd come to understand and forgive was actually the victim of a crime? What if his entire life with Evelyn had been built not on redemption, but on flight from danger that had followed him from Norfolk? Michael stood in his office, staring out at the December afternoon, without really seeing the snowy streets below. The phone call from his mother had triggered a familiar anxiety, the same feeling he'd had at Christmas a year ago, when he'd first suspected his father was hiding something significant. He'd thought they were past all this. After months of discovery and revelation, after learning about Catherine and James, after understanding the complicated love story that had shaped his father's life, Michael had finally made peace with John's past. The wedding had felt like a celebration of that peace. A moment when all the broken pieces had been reassembled into something beautiful. Now a police detective was suggesting there were still missing pieces. His assistant knocked on the door. Michael? The Hendersons are here for their closing. The Hendersons, the divorcing couple, whose property dispute he'd helped resolve earlier in the year. Their house sale had been finalized. Their assets divided, their shared life officially dissolved. Michael envied them the clean completion of their story. Send them in, he said, forcing himself to focus on work. The closing proceeded smoothly, with both parties signing documents with the relief of people who had survived a difficult process. As they prepared to leave, Janet Henderson lingered. Mr. Parker, I wanted to thank you again for helping us through this. The way you helped us preserve what mattered while still moving forward, it made all the difference. I'm glad it worked out. You know, I was thinking about what you said about honoring memories without being trapped by them. It's made me realize that endings aren't always failures. Sometimes they're necessary for new beginnings. After they left, Michael found himself thinking about Janet's words. His father's story had been full of endings that had enabled new beginnings. The end of his marriage to Eleanor, the end of John Daniel Morrison, the beginning of John David Parker. But what if some of those endings had been forced rather than chosen? What if John hadn't been making brave decisions about starting over, but desperate decisions about staying alive? Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Anna. Dad, I'm worried about this detective visit. What if we learn something that changes how we feel about Grandpa? He texted back, then we'll deal with it as a family. But Anna, remember what we have learned. Your grandfather was a good man who lived a good life with us for 50 years. Whatever happened before doesn't erase that. But what if he lied about more than we realized? What If his whole identity was built on something worse than abandoning his family? Michael stared at his daughter's text, feeling the weight of her concern. Anna had found such inspiration in John's story of redemption, had seen it as proof that people could change and grow and become better than their mistakes. What would it do to her faith in human goodness if they learned that John's transformation had been motivated by fear rather than love? "Whatever we learn, we'll face it together," he texted back. Truth is always better than uncertainty, even when it's painful. But as he prepared to leave the office early for the family meeting, Michael wasn't sure he believed his own words. Some truths were more destructive than the lies they replaced. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. Detective Ray Morrison was younger than Evelyn had expected, probably in his early 40s. With graying temples and his grandmother Eleanor's intelligent blue eyes, he sat in Evelyn's living room with a thick file folder and the careful demeanor of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. Catherine had arrived an hour early, bringing the letter she'd found in her mother's papers. Michael sat beside his mother, protective and tense. Anna appeared on Evelyn's laptop screen via video call, her dorm room visible in the background. First, Detective Morrison began, "I want to thank you all for agreeing to meet with me. I know this must be difficult, especially during the holidays." "Detective," Evelyn said, "before you begin, I think you should see this." She handed him Eleanor's letter about John being sent away. He read it carefully, then looked up with a grim expression. "Mrs. Parker, I'm afraid this letter contradicts the evidence we have from 1954. My grandmother filed a missing persons report 6 weeks after your husband disappeared, claiming she suspected foul play." Catherine pulled out the carbon copy she'd found. "I discovered this in my mother's papers this morning. It's the letter she sent to the police." Detective Morrison examined both documents, his expression growing more troubled. Two completely different stories. In 1954, she believed John was the victim of a crime. Decades later, she claimed she sent him away for his own good. People's memories change over time, Michael suggested, especially when they're trying to make sense of painful events. Perhaps. But there's something else. Detective Morrison opened his file folder. In 1955, a body was found in the Chesapeake Bay. Male, approximately 25 years old, wearing a wedding ring engraved with the initials J.D.M. The body was too decomposed to identify, but the timing and physical description matched John Daniel Morrison. The room fell silent except for the sound of Anna's sharp intake of breath through the laptop speakers. Evelyn felt the world tilting around her. "You think the body was my husband? I think it's possible." The case was never officially closed, because there wasn't enough evidence for positive identification. But Mrs. Parker, if that body was John Daniel Morrison, then the man you married was someone else entirely. Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. But the handwriting in the letters, the knowledge of Norfolk, the details about my childhood, could have been obtained by someone who knew John well. A friend, a coworker, someone who had access to his personal information. Michael stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is insane. Are you suggesting that our father was an impostor? That he stole a dead man's identity? I'm suggesting it's a possibility we need to investigate. Mr. Parker, do you have any photographs of your father? From the early years of his marriage to your mother?" Evelyn nodded numbly and went to fetch the photo albums. She returned with pictures from the late 1950s, their wedding, early anniversaries, Michael as a baby. Detective Morrison studied the photographs carefully, comparing them to a police file photo of John Daniel Morrison from 1953. The resemblance was strong but not perfect. Similar height and build, similar coloring, but subtle differences in facial structure. "The bone structure is different," he observed. "The nose, the jawline. These could be two different men. Or the same man after a year of stress and hard living, Catherine protested. People change, especially when they're struggling. On the laptop screen, Anna's voice was shaky. Detective Morrison, what exactly are you suggesting happened? One possibility is that John Daniel Morrison was murdered in 1954. And someone else assumed his identity to escape their own problems. That person then became John David Parker. And built a life with your grandmother. But why? Evelyn asked. Why choose John's identity specifically? Because John Daniel Morrison had already established the groundwork for disappearing. He'd been acting nervous, talking about owing money to dangerous people. If someone killed him, they might have realized his identity was perfect. For someone who needed to vanish. Michael returned to his seat, his face pale. Detective, even if this theory is true, what difference does it make now? The man we knew as our father is dead. John Daniel Morrison is dead. Everyone involved in whatever happened in 1954 is probably dead. Why dig this up now? Because there might be living victims. If John Daniel Morrison was murdered, his killer might have gotten away with it. And if the man you knew as your father was actually someone else, there might be people who've spent 60 years wondering what happened to their missing loved one. The implications hit them all simultaneously. If their father hadn't been John Daniel Morrison, then who had he been? What family had he left behind? What crimes might he have been fleeing? I need to run some tests, Detective Morrison continued. Compare DNA from John David Parker with samples from the John Daniel Morrison case file. Check dental records if they exist. It might take several weeks to get definitive answers. Evelyn found her voice. And if the tests prove they were different people? Then we'll need to figure out who John David Parker really was. Before he became the man you loved. After Detective Morrison left, the family sat in stunned silence. The comfortable narrative they'd built around John's redemption story had been shattered. Replaced by questions that seemed to have no good answers. I need to come home, Anna said from the laptop screen. I can't deal with this from New York. Anna, no, Catherine said firmly. You have finals next week. This situation will still be here when you're finished with the semester. But what if everything we believed about Grandpa was a lie? What if he wasn't a man seeking redemption, but a criminal hiding from his past? Michael rubbed his temples. Anna, even if the worst-case scenario is true, it doesn't change how he treated us. It doesn't change the love he showed our family for 50 years. We would like to interrupt to ask if you like the video. Please subscribe and like the video and comment below for any of your suggestions for the future references. Thank you for watching our channel. Doesn't it? Anna's voice rose with emotion. If he was living under a stolen identity, if he might have been a murderer. We don't know any of that, Evelyn interrupted. We have theories and possibilities, not facts. Catherine was studying the photographs Detective Morrison had left behind, comparison shots of John Daniel Morrison and John David Parker. The differences could be explained by age and circumstance, she said slowly. But I have to admit, looking at them side by side. What are you thinking? Michael asked. I'm thinking about the man who raised me from age 3. My stepfather. He used to say that my birth father had been troubled, involved with dangerous people. I always assumed he was just trying to make sense of why John had left us. But what if he knew something more specific? What if there were rumors in Norfolk about what really happened to John Daniel Morrison? Evelyn stood up suddenly. I need to be alone for a while. It's too much to process. After she left the room, Michael, Catherine, and Anna via video sat in heavy silence. I keep thinking about the journal, Catherine said finally. The one we found in John's workshop. The emotional journey it documented, the guilt and redemption. If our father wasn't John Daniel Morrison, then whose story were we reading? Maybe the story of whoever he really was, Michael suggested. Maybe he was running from his own mistakes, his own failures, and he found inspiration in John Daniel Morrison's story. Or maybe he killed John Daniel Morrison and spent the rest of his life trying to atone for it, by becoming the man John should have been. The starkness of Catherine's words hung in the air like a physical presence. "I can't accept that," Anna said from the screen. "I won't accept that. The man I knew as my grandfather was kind, gentle, patient. He was incapable of violence. People are capable of surprising things when they're desperate," Catherine said quietly. "I've seen it in my students over the years, children who seem sweet and innocent until circumstances push them to extremes." Michael felt anger rising in his chest. "So what are you suggesting? That we throw away 50 years of loving memories because of a police theory that might be completely wrong? I'm suggesting that we need to be prepared for the possibility that everything we thought we knew was built on a foundation of lies and violence. And I'm suggesting that even if that's true, it doesn't change who we are or how much we've loved each other," Michael shot back. "Catherine, your father, whoever he really was, loved you enough to support you from a distance for decades. He loved us enough to be a devoted husband and father. That's not the behavior of a cold-blooded killer. Unless he was trying to make up for his crimes." The argument was interrupted by Evelyn's return. She had been crying, but her expression was resolute. "I've made a decision," she announced. "We're going to cooperate fully with Detective Morrison's investigation. We're going to submit to DNA testing, provide dental records if they exist, and answer any questions he has." "Mom," Michael began. "No, Michael. We spent months learning that secrets destroy families. We can't start keeping secrets now just because the truth might be painful." Catherine nodded slowly. "Evelyn's right. Whatever we learn, we face it together. But what if the truth destroys us?" Anna asked. "What if we can't love him anymore once we know who he really was?" Evelyn looked directly at the laptop camera. "Anna, love isn't something you lose because you learn uncomfortable facts. It's something you choose, over and over again, despite uncomfortable facts. If your grandfather was a flawed man who spent his life trying to become better, then we'll love him for the effort. If he was a criminal who found redemption through family, then we'll love him for the transformation. And if he was a murderer?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "Then we'll love the good he created in spite of the evil he might have done. Because Anna, the alternative is to let fear and judgment destroy the beautiful family we've built together." 2 weeks later, as Christmas approached, the family was struggling to maintain their holiday traditions. While living under the shadow of Detective Morrison's investigation, the DNA tests had been submitted, but results wouldn't be available until after the new year. Anna had returned from Columbia for winter break, but the reunion was subdued. She moved through the house like someone afraid of disturbing sleeping ghosts, handling John's belongings with the careful reverence of someone no longer sure what they represented. Catherine had moved into her new cottage, but hadn't yet found the joy she'd expected in creating a space for family gatherings. The garden remained unplanted, the guest room unprepared, as if she couldn't commit to building a future until she understood the past. Michael threw himself into work, handling year-end closings and property transfers with an intensity that suggested he was trying to outrun his thoughts. He found comfort in the concrete reality of legal documents and financial transactions, in problems that could be solved with signatures and negotiations. Only Evelyn seemed determined to maintain normalcy. She decorated the house with her usual care, bought presents for everyone, planned the Christmas dinner menu with meticulous attention to detail. "You don't have to pretend everything is fine," Anna told her grandmother as they wrapped gifts together on Christmas Eve morning. "I'm not pretending. Everything is fine. Grandma, we're waiting to find out if Grandpa was a murderer. That's not fine. Evelyn set down the ribbon she had been cutting and looked at her granddaughter seriously. Anna, let me ask you something. If we learn tomorrow that your grandfather killed John Daniel Morrison, will that change how you feel about the bedtime stories he told you when you were little? I don't know. Will it change the fact that he taught you to ride a bicycle? That he came to every school play, that he cried when you graduated from high school? No, but will it change the love he showed our family for 50 years? Anna struggled with the question. It would change the context of that love. It would mean everything was built on a lie. Would it? Or would it mean that love has the power to transform even the worst among us? Catherine entered the living room carrying a tray of hot chocolate. Are we having the conversation again? We're always having the conversation, Michael said, following her in. It's like we're stuck in a loop, trying to prepare for every possible outcome. Maybe that's because we're afraid of our own reactions, Catherine suggested. We're not really worried about who he was. We're worried about who we'll become if we learn he was someone terrible. Anna looked up from the present she was wrapping. What do you mean? I mean, if we learn he was a killer, do we become the family that loved a killer? If we learn he was a victim, do we become the family that was deceived for 50 years? Either way, it changes our story about ourselves. Michael sat down in John's old chair, unconsciously taking on the protective posture his father had always assumed during difficult family conversations. Maybe our story doesn't change. Maybe we're still the family that chose love over fear, understanding over judgment, connection over isolation. Even if he murdered someone? Even if he murdered someone, Michael said firmly. Because the man who might have committed that crime died along with John Daniel Morrison 60 years ago. The man who raised me, who loved this family, who spent decades trying to be worthy of our love, that man was real. Regardless of what name he was born with. Evelyn smiled at her son. When did you become so wise? When I realized that the alternative to forgiveness is living in judgment forever. And I don't want to waste whatever time we have left as a family being angry about things we can't change. Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Through the front window, they could see a car with government plates in the driveway. Detective Morrison, Catherine said unnecessarily. On Christmas Eve? Anna's voice carried a note of disbelief. Evelyn went to answer the door. Returning with Detective Morrison and another man she introduced as Dr. James Chen from the state medical examiner's office. I'm sorry to interrupt your Christmas Eve, Detective Morrison said. But we have preliminary results from the DNA testing. The family gathered in the living room, with Anna unconsciously moving closer to her father and Catherine reaching for Evelyn's hand. The results are complicated, Dr. Chen began. The DNA samples we recovered from John David Parker's remains effects do show some markers consistent with the John Daniel Morrison case file. Some markers? Michael asked. Enough to suggest they could be the same person. But not enough to be conclusive. The samples from 1954 were degraded, and the comparison isn't definitive. So we still don't know? Anna's voice was tight with frustration. We know more than we did, Detective Morrison said. We've also been investigating John David Parker's background more thoroughly. The paper trail for his identity begins in 1955, when he applied for a job at Henderson Hardware. Before that, there's no record of anyone named John David Parker. But there were legal documents, Catherine protested. Social security cards, birth certificates. Forged, Dr. Chen said simply. Very good forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Evelyn felt the room spinning around her. So he definitely wasn't who he claimed to be. That's correct. John David Parker was an assumed identity. The question is whether he was John Daniel Morrison. living under a false name, or someone else entirely who had stolen Morrison's identity? How do we find out? Michael asked. Detective Morrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a file folder. We've been working with genealogy databases, comparing the DNA we recovered with profiles from people searching for missing relatives. We found something interesting. He handed them a printout showing a family tree with highlighted connections. Your husband's DNA shows familial matches with the Kowalski family from Pittsburgh. Specifically, he appears to be closely related to someone named Thomas Kowalski, who was reported missing in March of 1954. The silence in the room was deafening. Thomas Kowalski was 24 years old when he disappeared. He had been working construction jobs around the East Coast, including some projects in the Norfolk area. He had a history of minor criminal activity, petty theft, bar fights, nothing violent. But he owed money to some dangerous people in Pittsburgh. You think Thomas Kowalski killed John Daniel Morrison and stole his identity? Catherine asked. We think it's possible. Morrison was planning to disappear. Anyway, he'd been talking about owing money to dangerous people. If Kowalski was in similar trouble, Morrison's planned disappearance might have seemed like the perfect cover. Anna's voice was barely audible. So our grandfather was Thomas Kowalski, not John Daniel Morrison or John David Parker. It appears so. We're still waiting for more definitive DNA results. But the evidence is pointing in that direction. Evelyn stood up abruptly. Gentlemen, I appreciate your thoroughness, but I need you to leave now. This is Christmas Eve, and whatever my husband's name was, he was a good man who deserves to have his family together on the holidays he loved. After the detectives left, the family sat in stunned silence. Everything they thought they'd learned about John's past had been overturned again. He wasn't a man seeking redemption for abandoning his family. He was apparently a petty criminal who had possibly committed murder and stolen an identity. I need some air, Anna said, standing up and walking toward the back door. Anna, wait, Catherine called. I just need to think. They watched through the kitchen window as Anna walked to the garden, stopping beside the roses that had been such a symbol of John's capacity for creating beauty. She stood there for a long time, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Should we go to her? Catherine asked. Give her a moment, Michael suggested. She needs to process this on her own before we can help her. What are we going to do? Evelyn asked. How do we celebrate Christmas knowing what we know? The same way we celebrate everything else, Catherine said firmly. Together, with love, choosing each other over and over again, regardless of what names we were born with or what mistakes we've made. But this isn't just a mistake, Evelyn protested. If he killed someone, then he spent 60 years trying to atone for it, Michael interrupted. And he succeeded. He became a man worthy of our love, regardless of what he did to earn that chance. Through the window, they watched Anna return to the garden tool shed. Emerging with a small shovel, she knelt beside the rose bushes and began digging carefully in the frozen ground. What is she doing? Catherine wondered. They bundled into coats and went outside to find Anna planting something small beside the established roses. Anna? Evelyn called gently. Anna looked up, tears streaking her face. I'm planting the bulbs Grandpa gave me for my birthday last year. Daffodils. He said they would bloom every spring, to remind me that beautiful things can grow from buried seeds. Sweetheart, he's still my grandfather, Anna said fiercely. I don't care what his name was or what he did before I was born. He's still the man who taught me that love is stronger than fear. That families choose each other, that redemption is always possible. Catherine knelt beside her niece. Anna, you don't have to defend him to us. Yes, I do. Because if I don't believe that people can change, that love can transform even the worst among us, then what hope is there for any of us? Michael and Evelyn joined them in the garden. 4 generations of a family that had been built on lies but sustained by love. "Then we'll believe it together," Michael said. "We'll choose to see the man he became rather than the man he might have been." As they stood together in the cold December air, surrounded by dormant roses and newly planted hope, they made a silent pact to celebrate their imperfect, complicated, beautiful family. Regardless of what names they had been born with, regardless of what secrets might yet be revealed, regardless of anything except their commitment to choose love over fear. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold. But inside Evelyn's house, warmth struggled against the chill of unresolved questions. The family had agreed to proceed with their traditional celebration, but the atmosphere was subdued, as if they were all tiptoeing around sleeping secrets. Anna was the first one. Downstairs, drawn by the smell of Evelyn's traditional Christmas breakfast casserole. She found her grandmother already in the kitchen, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had orchestrated 50 years of Christmas mornings. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Merry Christmas, Grandma. Are you okay?" Evelyn paused in her preparations. "I'm trying to be. Anna, I keep thinking about something your grandfather used to say about Christmas. He said it was the one day of the year when everyone had permission to believe in miracles. What kind of miracle are you hoping for? The miracle of understanding, of finding peace with truth, even when it's complicated." Michael and Catherine arrived within minutes of each other, both carrying the careful expressions of people who had spent the night wrestling with difficult emotions. "Any word from Detective Morrison?" Catherine asked. "Not today," Evelyn said firmly. "Today is about family, not investigations." They opened presents with determined cheer, exclaiming over gifts that had been chosen before their world had been overturned again. Anna's gift from John, a set of antique books on child psychology, carried new weight in light of what they'd learned. Had Thomas Kowalski chosen those books because he somehow understood Anna's interests? Or had he been following some deeper instinct about nurturing young minds? "I have something for all of you," Catherine said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small wrapped package. "I found this when I was going through the last of my mother's papers." Inside was a small leather journal, much older than the one they'd found in John's workshop. The cover was worn smooth, and the pages were filled with handwriting that looked like John's, but somehow different, younger, more uncertain. "I think this belonged to whoever our father really was," Catherine said quietly, "before he became John Daniel Morrison or John David Parker." Anna opened the journal carefully, reading the first entry aloud. "January 1954, Pittsburgh. Ma died today. Tommy says it's God's will, but I think it's just what happens when you work yourself to death. Trying to feed 5 kids on factory wages. The funeral is tomorrow, and then I don't know what happens to us. Tommy's been talking about leaving town. Says there's work down south, construction jobs that pay better than anything we can find here. But I don't want to leave. This is where Ma is buried, where Dad worked before the accident. This is home, even if it's not much of one. But staying might not be safe. Tommy owes money to Sal Marconis guys. And they're not the kind to forget debts just because your mother died. Maybe leaving is the only choice we have." Michael looked up from the journal. Thomas Kowalski had a brother?" Catherine nodded. "According to this, yes. And it looks like our father, whatever his real name was running from his brother's debts, not his own." They continued reading, passing the journal between them as a story emerged that was both familiar and entirely new. The young man writing these entries wasn't Thomas Kowalski, the petty criminal, but his younger brother, someone named David, who had been trying to protect his family from his older brother's mistakes. March 10, 1954, Norfolk, Virginia. Tommy found work at the shipyard. Says we'll save up money and head to California, start fresh. where nobody knows us. But I like it here. The ocean reminds me of Lake Erie back home, and the people are friendly enough. Met a girl today, Eleanor. She's married, has a baby. But she looked so sad sitting in that park all by herself. Her husband works long hours, and she seems lonely. I bought her coffee and listened to her talk about how hard marriage is when you barely know the person you married. I shouldn't have done that. Tommy would be furious if he knew I was making friends, getting attached. But it felt good to help someone. To be useful for something other than running away. March 14, 1954. Everything's gone wrong. Tommy got drunk last night and picked a fight with some guys from the shipyard. Turns out one of them was connected to the same kind of people we were running from in Pittsburgh. Now we've got trouble here too. Tommy says we need to disappear completely this time. New names, new identities, new lives. He knows a guy who can get us papers, but it costs money we don't have. I think about Eleanor and little Catherine. If I disappear, Eleanor will think her friend just abandoned her. But if I stay, Tommy and I might both end up dead. March 15, 1954. Tommy's dead. The guys from the shipyard found him by the docks this morning. Beat him to death for the money he owed them, then threw him in the water. Sorry to interrupt, but can we ask you to subscribe and like our video? It would mean a lot creating these videos. Again, thank you for watching our videos. I should feel sad, but mostly I feel relieved. And that makes me hate myself. Eleanor's husband disappeared today too. She came to me crying, saying John hadn't come home last night. That she was scared something terrible had happened. I wanted to tell her about Tommy, wanted to explain why I might have to leave too. But how do you tell someone that you've brought danger to their life? Just by being their friend? The man who makes fake papers says he can give me John Daniel Morrison's identity. Says John was planning to disappear anyway. That his wife won't report him missing for weeks. Says I can take his name, his social security number, start over completely. I know it's wrong. But Tommy's dead, and the people who killed him know what I look like. If I stay David Kowalski, I'll end up floating in the bay next to my brother. If I become John Daniel Morrison, I can disappear. And maybe, somehow, find a way to help Eleanor and Catherine without putting them in danger. It's not theft if I use the identity to become a better man than either David Kowalski or John Daniel Morrison ever was. God forgive me. The journal fell silent after that entry. But the family sat in stunned recognition. Their father hadn't killed John Daniel Morrison. He had taken the identity of a man who was already planning to disappear. A man whose own death would have gone unnoticed for weeks. So he was David Kowalski, Anna said softly. Not Thomas. David. David who tried to help Eleanor when she was lonely, Catherine added. David who felt guilty about bringing danger into their lives. David who spent the rest of his life trying to be worthy of the second chance he'd been given, Michael concluded. Evelyn looked around at her family, seeing the relief in their faces. So he wasn't a murderer. He was a victim who escaped and then spent 60 years atoning for survival. But Detective Morrison said the DNA matched Thomas Kowalski's family, Anna pointed out. Brothers share DNA, Catherine reminded her. The genealogy database would show David as being related to Thomas's family. Because they were siblings, Michael stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden, where John David had spent so many hours creating beauty from ordinary soil. All this time, we thought he was carrying guilt over abandoning his family. But he was actually carrying guilt over surviving when his brother didn't. And guilt over taking John Daniel Morrison's identity, Anna added. Even though he used it to become a better man than either David Kowalski or John Morrison might have been. Should we tell Detective Morrison? Catherine asked. Evelyn considered the question. We should share the journal, yes. But I think what we've learned here is that David made a choice to transform himself completely. He became John David Parker not to hide from a crime, but to escape from a life that would have destroyed him, and to protect the people he cared about. Anna said, thinking of Eleanor and baby Catherine. So what do we do with this information? Michael asked. We honor it, Catherine said firmly. We understand that the man we loved was someone who chose love over fear, hope over despair, redemption over resignation. Whether his name was David or John or Thomas doesn't matter. What matters is who he chose to become. That afternoon, while preparing Christmas dinner, Anna found herself drawn back to the garden. The daffodil bulbs she'd planted on Christmas Eve were invisible beneath the frozen soil. But she knew they were there, waiting for spring to call them into bloom. She was surprised to find Catherine already there, kneeling beside the rose bushes with a small hand spade. What are you doing, Aunt Catherine? I wanted to plant something too. These bulbs are from the roses in Norfolk, the ones that survived 50 years of neglect. Catherine held up small root divisions she'd carefully prepared. I thought it was time to bring the two gardens together completely. Anna knelt beside her aunt, helping to prepare holes for the new plantings. Do you think he would have wanted that? The gardens connected? I think David Kowalski, who became John Daniel Morrison, who became John David Parker, would have loved the idea that beauty could survive transplantation and grow stronger in new soil. They worked together in comfortable silence, their hands dark with earth despite the cold. Other family members gradually joined them, Michael carrying tools from the workshop, Evelyn bringing thermoses of hot chocolate. This is becoming quite the project, Michael observed, watching his daughter and sister-in-law create what looked like a formal garden bed. It's a memorial, Anna said simply, for all the people Dad used to be, and for the man he chose to become. As they worked, they talked about what they'd learned from the journal, about the young man who had lost his mother and brother, and nearly lost himself before finding salvation in assumed identity and eventual love. I keep thinking about Eleanor, Catherine said, as she tamped soil around a new planting. She befriended David Kowalski and never knew he was the one who took her husband's identity. But in a way, she got her husband back, Evelyn pointed out. The man David became was probably closer to the husband Eleanor needed than John Daniel Morrison ever could have been. Do you think he ever considered telling her the truth? Anna wondered. I think he considered it every day, Michael said, remembering the boxes of unsent letters they'd found. But how do you tell someone that you took their husband's identity? Even if that husband was planning to abandon them anyway? You don't, Catherine said quietly. You spend the rest of your life trying to be worthy of the name you took and the love you found. As the sun began to set, they put away their tools and stood back to admire their work. The garden bed now contained roses from 3 different sources, Evelyn's original plantings, cuttings from Norfolk, and new varieties they'd chosen together. By spring, it would be impossible to tell which roses had come from where. They would all be part of the same beautiful, complicated garden. I have an idea, Anna said suddenly. What if we created a scholarship fund in his memory? Not in any of his names, but just for kids who need second chances. Kids who've lost parents, or who are aging out of foster care, or who need help escaping difficult circumstances. That's beautiful, Catherine said immediately. A way to honor his transformation. By helping other people transform their own lives. We could call it the Second Chances Scholarship, Michael suggested. And we could fund it with money from the Norfolk estate settlements, from his life insurance, from whatever resources we can pull together. Evelyn smiled, the first genuinely happy expression she'd worn since Detective Morrison's visit. David would love that. Using his story to help other people write better endings to their own stories. As they headed back toward the house for Christmas dinner, Anna lingered for a moment in the garden. The dormant roses and buried bulbs looked lifeless in the winter twilight. But she knew that spring would reveal their true nature. Growth that seemed impossible in December would prove inevitable in March. Just like her grandfather, whatever his name had been, had proven. That transformation was always possible, that love could bloom from the most unlikely circumstances. That families could be created by choice as much as by blood. 3 days after Christmas, Detective Morrison returned with the final DNA results. And the journal that Catherine had shared with him. His expression was thoughtful rather than official. As he sat once again in Evelyn's living room, the handwriting analysis confirms that this journal was written by the same person. Who wrote the letters you found in the workshop, he began. And the genealogy matches make sense. Now David Kowalski was indeed Thomas Kowalski's younger brother. So we were right about what happened? Anna asked. You were right about the essential facts. David Kowalski took John Daniel Morrison's identity after Thomas was killed. Probably as much to protect Eleanor and Catherine from further violence as to save himself. What about the body that was found in the Chesapeake Bay? Michael asked. Almost certainly Thomas Kowalski, not John Daniel Morrison. The timing matches and the circumstances fit with what David wrote about. His brother's death. Evelyn leaned forward. Detective, what happens now? Is there going to be a criminal investigation? Mrs. Parker, the men who killed Thomas Kowalski are likely dead themselves by now. The statute of limitations has long expired on identity theft. And honestly, David Kowalski used John Daniel Morrison's identity to become a better man, not to commit crimes. From a legal standpoint, there's nothing to prosecute. So it's over? Catherine asked. It's over. You can lay your husband to rest. Knowing that he was a good man who made difficult choices in impossible circumstances. He wasn't a killer or a career criminal. He was a survivor who spent 60 years earning the right to the love he found. After Detective Morrison left, the family sat together, processing the conclusion of their long journey toward understanding. The man they had loved as John David Parker had been born. David Kowalski had briefly lived as John Daniel Morrison, and had ultimately become someone entirely new, someone worthy of the name he'd chosen and the family he'd built. I'm glad we know the truth, Anna said finally. But you know what? It doesn't change how I feel about him. If anything, it makes me love him more. Why? Catherine asked. Because he shows that people really can change completely. That you're not trapped by where you come from or what happens to you. That love and choice and determination can literally transform you into someone new. Michael nodded. And because he proves that families aren't just about blood or shared history. They're about choosing each other, over and over again. Despite complications and secrets and difficulties. Speaking of which, Catherine said, I have an announcement. I've enrolled in a master's degree program in social work. I want to help families navigate crises and transitions. I want to use what we've learned to help other people find their way through complicated situations. Catherine, that's wonderful, Evelyn exclaimed. When do you start? Fall semester. I'll be a 70-year-old graduate student. But I figure if David Kowalski could reinvent himself at 24, I can reinvent myself at 70. Anna beamed at her aunt. You'll be amazing. And I'll help you with research and papers when I'm home from Columbia. Speaking of Columbia, Michael said, how are you feeling about going back? Excited, Anna said honestly. I feel like I understand myself better now. Understand what I want to do with my life. I want to study how families heal from trauma. How people build resilience, how love survives even the most difficult circumstances. You want to study us, Catherine said with a smile. I want to study people like us. Families who refuse to let secrets and complications destroy their connections. People who choose love over fear, understanding over judgment. Evelyn stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the garden. They'd planted together on Christmas Day. David would be proud of all of you. Of the choices you're making, the lives you're building, the love you're sharing. He'd be proud of you too, Grandma, Anna said, for holding this family together. Through all the revelations and complications. We held each other together, Evelyn corrected. That's what families do. As afternoon faded into evening, they made plans for Anna's return to New York, Catherine's graduate school applications, and the Second Chances scholarship they would establish in David's memory. They talked about spring planting in the garden, about James and Sarah's first anniversary celebration, about the ordinary and extraordinary moments that lay ahead. But mostly, they simply sat together, 4 people who had learned that love was stronger than secrets, that truth was worth pursuing, even when it was painful, and that families could survive and even thrive in the face of the most complicated revelations. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the garden, where roses and daffodils waited beneath the soil for spring's call to growth. Inside, a family settled into the comfortable rhythm of people who had chosen each other not just once, but over and over again, through every season of joy and sorrow, revelation and mystery, love and loss. David Kowalski, John Daniel Morrison, John David Parker, whatever name he had carried. He had given them the gift of understanding that identity was not fixed, that love could transform anyone, and that families were created as much by choice as by circumstance. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Epilogue. The scholarship letter. 6 months later, Anna sat in her Columbia University dorm room, reviewing applications for the first Second Chances scholarship. The fund had grown beyond their expectations. Supported not just by their family's contributions but by donations from friends, community members, and even some of Michael's real estate clients who had been moved by the story. The application that caught her attention was from a 17-year-old named Maria Santos, who had aged out of foster care and was working 2 jobs while trying to finish high school. Her essay was brief but powerful. I don't know who my parents were or why they gave me up. For most of my life, I thought that meant I was unwanted, that I didn't deserve good things. But my social worker told me about this scholarship, about how it was created in memory of someone who proved that you can become whoever you choose to be, regardless of where you start. I want to study social work so I can help other kids like me understand that their stories aren't over just because they had difficult beginnings. I want to prove that love and determination can create families, even when biology doesn't. I want to show that second chances can become first chances if you're brave enough to take them. I don't know if I deserve this scholarship, but I promise that if you give me this chance, I'll use it to give chances to other people. I'll become someone worth the investment. Just like the person this scholarship honors became someone worth remembering. Anna wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading. This was exactly what they had hoped. For someone who understood that transformation was possible. That love could be chosen, that families could be created through intention as much as accident. She picked up her phone to call the family group chat they'd established. Within minutes, Catherine, Michael, and Evelyn were all connected. I think we found our first recipient, Anna announced, reading Maria's essay aloud. She sounds perfect, Catherine said immediately. Someone who understands that second chances are really just first chances in disguise. David would love her story, Evelyn added. And he'd love that we're using his story to help her write a better ending to hers. So we're all agreed? Michael asked. Maria Santos gets the first Second Chances scholarship? Absolutely, they all responded in unison. After they hung up, Anna sat back in her chair. looking out at the New York skyline, and thinking about the complicated journey that had brought their family to this moment. A year ago, she had been a college student, with a simple understanding of her family history. Now she was a graduate student specializing in family resilience, carrying forward the legacy of a grandfather who had proven that anyone could choose to become someone new. She opened her laptop and began typing the letter that would change Maria Santos's life. Dear Maria, congratulations. You have been selected to receive the first Second Chances Scholarship. This award will cover your tuition, room, and board for 4 years of undergraduate study. This scholarship was created in memory of someone who understood that our beginnings don't determine our endings, that love can transform anyone, and that families are created by choice as much as by circumstance. Your essay showed us that you understand these truths as well. We believe in your dreams of helping other young people find their way from difficult circumstances to hopeful futures. We believe in your capacity to become someone who gives chances to others. Because someone gave a chance to you. Welcome to the family of second chances. Make us proud by becoming everything you're meant to be. With hope and support, the Second Chances Scholarship Committee. P.S. Remember that transformation is always possible, that love is always a choice, and that the most beautiful gardens grow from the most unlikely soil. As Anna sealed the letter, she felt her grandfather's presence, not as the mysterious figure he had been when she was younger, but as the complete person she now understood him to be. David Kowalski, who had become John Daniel Morrison, who had become John David Parker, who had ultimately become simply and powerfully himself. A man who proved that love could overcome any obstacle, that families could survive any revelation, and that second chances could bloom into first-class lives. Outside her window, spring was arriving in New York City. Somewhere in Virginia, roses and daffodils were emerging from the soil her family had planted together. And somewhere in the future, Maria Santos was about to discover that her story was just beginning. That her family of choice was expanding to include people who believed in her dreams. The fractured past had become the foundation for a beautiful future. And that, Anna thought as she prepared the letter for mailing, was exactly what her grandfather would have wanted. End of episode 4. How will Maria's scholarship journey affect the Parker family? What new connections will emerge as they continue to honor David's legacy? And what happens when other families discover the truth about second chances? Don't miss episode 5, The Heart's Redemption, coming next week. Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell to follow the Parker family's continuing journey of love, healing, and hope. Share this episode with someone who believes in the power of transformation, second chances, and chosen family. What did you think of the revelation about David Kowalski? How do you feel about the scholarship program? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching our videos.